Welcome back to Our Stories. We continue with coverage of the Oscar Pistorius trial, a story that dominated 2014, and it isn't over yet. Pistorius is in prison serving time for culpable homicide, but the state has been granted leave to appeal that verdict. That's going to play out in early 2015. But let's go back to the trial itself, which got underway in March 2014. The prosecution brought in key witnesses, including some of Pistorius' neighbors, who testified that they heard screams and shouting shortly before gunshots.
The state called Michelle Berger as its first witness. She lives in the complex bordering Pistorius' house. She claims she was woken by a woman's screams on the night of Steenkamp's death, closely followed by gunshots. But Pistorius' lawyer has tried to discredit her version of events.
You're speculating, you're trying to close all the gaps. I want you to bear in mind that what I'm going to put to you in due course is your statement. And I want to put to you that your statement contradicts what you say in court now.
I was woken up by a woman's petrified screams. I heard her screaming first. Then I heard her call for help. Then I heard a man call for help 3 times.
Berger remained calm under intense cross-examination.
Pistorius is really anxious, and he screams when he pitches his voice. We'll call a witness in that respect. If I put it to you, it sounds like a woman, what would you say? That it's not true?
Milady, I don't think I've ever heard Mr. Pistorius screaming.
The defense had to explain its line of questioning to the judge, suggesting Berger didn't hear Steenkamp in distress, but Pistorius calling for help after the shooting. Pistorius' legal team has argued Berger may have mistaken the sound of the Paralympian breaking down the bathroom door with a cricket bat for gunshots.
We're watching that clip of Michelle Berger, and seeing Barry Roux cross-examine her looked like one of the most excruciating things ever. But for an ordinary citizen of this country who's never seen what happens to witnesses in the box, it certainly caused a stir across the country.
No, it looked like the most hideous, I think excruciating is the right word. It looked like the most horrible experience. It's not always that bad. I think that Barry Roux and Gerinel are very good at cross-examination. But I think it just left everybody in the courtroom and watching it on television thinking, may I never be called to testify in a court case, because it just looked so uncomfortable. And I actually think Michelle Berger was a good witness in her evidence in chief. She was competent, she was intelligent, but by the time Barry Roux finished with her, you just felt she was quite broken almost.
And the thing was with this case was that you had 2 narratives, the state's narrative and the defense narrative, that were very, very, very similar, except for a few very key respects. And the screaming was one of the major respects. And the defense counsel knew that if the judge believed that it was a woman screaming that morning, Oscar Pistorius would have been convicted of murder, and possibly even premeditated murder. There's been a great deal of criticism about the state's desire to pursue a premeditated murder charge. A number of people have come out and said this was always going to end in tears, and that they should have rather focused on Oscar Pistorius' version of the events in that morning and argued on that level that he was guilty of murder under the principle of dolus eventualis. But Barry Roux clearly knew that Michelle Berger's evidence, having been chosen as the first witness for the state must have believed that she was their strongest kind of card in terms of the ear witnesses.
He had to completely stir things up so that she didn't know whether she was coming or going. That really was his job.
And ultimately the court found that, the defense's account of what had happened was correct, that it was in fact Oscar Pistorius screaming that she heard.
And in the main courtroom, things were much more serious than they were in the overflow courtroom, Pagamile, where you were. And certainly there was a lot of reaction from the people gathered there from day one. And it was something that the court had to almost rein in.
Because it wasn't the actual courtroom, people were a little bit more relaxed. So it was you know, so occasionally you would have these comments. There would be running commentary, actually, from time to time, depending on what the witnesses were saying.
I went into the overflow
depending on what was
courtroom,
going on.
and it was a totally different experience. People were literally shouting comments. There was a lot of laughter.
Calm down, though. People were accused of getting... My cell phone got stolen from overflow. I was most put out.
Well, it depended on the witness. You know, if the witness, like Michelle Berger was quite an interesting one. She, as you said, she was the first witness. And so, of course, everybody's attention was on the trial. It was packed, and everyone had something to say. But just to illustrate the point of how the public perhaps don't really understand how court works, and particularly cross-examination. If you look at what happened after that, for instance, Barry Roux' parody account on Twitter suddenly came up, and people sort of reacted in that spontaneous moment, going along with the energy of the trial.
One of the state's star witnesses was police ballistics expert Chris Mangena. He testified about how the bullets penetrated the bathroom door and how they hit Steenkamp. Mangena also testified about Pistorius' position while shooting at the door.